makes better traffic conditions and clean streets his top priority. And oh yeah, he also promises to help facilitate the return of the 12th Imam.
You know, he actually used to dress up in a orange jumpsuit, and he called to go out and sweep trash, and he called himself the Little Street Sweeper.
In April 2005, the Little Street Sweeper, still very much a political unknown, announced an unlikely run for the presidency of Iran. Almost no one showed up at his news conference. Public polls gave him only 3% support among voters. 2 months later, he was elected president. Ahmadinejad's re-election in 2009 was no less miraculous. In spite of a strong field of well-known candidates, he captured 63% of the vote, more than double his nearest competitor. Despite an 85% voter turnout and 40 million paper ballots cast, the Iranian government announced the results of the election just 2 hours after the polls closed, and the Ayatollah Khamenei declared him the winner even earlier. In both elections, the Revolutionary Guards served as campaign activists for Ahmadinejad. He returned the favor by appointing veterans of the Guard to half of his cabinet positions.
In Ahmadinejad's mind, he went from obscurity and no political support to the presidency of Iran for one reason. He believes he was chosen by Allah to become the leader of Iran in order to usher in the coming of the 12th Imam.
He believes he is John the Baptist of the Islamic faith.
In spite of his own belief in his preordained date with destiny, however, all indications are that Ahmadinejad is merely a bit player, a willing loudmouth puppet whose actions are tightly scripted.
Let me stress, Ahmadinejad is not the central figure in Iran. The main power centers in Iran are twofold. One is Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, and the second, of course, are the Revolutionary Guards and their elite commanders. It used to be in Iran that the power center was with the mullahs, with the religious clerics. But if you look at the Iranian parliament in the early 1980s, a good portion of it came from the clerical class. Today, the dominant power in the Iranian parliament are ex-Revolutionary Guards. So there's been an extreme power shift. But actually, because the Revolutionary Guards have adopted Shiite fanaticism, it's far more dangerous than it was back in the early 1980s.
If you go back and look historically at who our best friends in that part of the world have been, it's been the Iranians.
In 1979, that all changed.
The U.S. Embassy in Tehran has been invaded and occupied by Iranian students.
Americans held hostage for 444 days by radicals in a country most of us knew almost nothing about. The event captured our attention. It was the impetus for one of the longest-running shows on television.
This is Nightline.
It was also a low point in American history, a lack of decision, a lack of leadership, and failure.
2 of our American aircraft collided on the ground following a refueling operation in a remote desert location in Iran.
And I was there on the night of the 24th of April, 1980, as we attempted to rescue the 53 Americans that were being held in the American embassy in Tehran. And of course, you know, that mission failed about 100 miles from Tehran in a remote desert area when we had a collision between an RH-53 helicopter and a C-130. That was the one and only time that I've been there, but I remember it well.
As bad as it seemed back then, it's taken the world 3 decades to realize the true measure of evil unleashed by the revolution.
The Ayatollah returned from exile in France to start what we now know as the Islamic Revolution and established an Islamic Republic and implemented Sharia law, and then began to spread his theology as broadly as he could. And that is really when they began to, they being the Iranian regime, began to support terrorism, particularly Hamas and Hezbollah.
Iran's transformation from disruptive nuisance to global threat accelerated with Khomeini's death in 1989 and the elevation of his chosen successor, Radical Twelver Ali Khamenei. Although there were many steps along the way, the full evil intent of the new regime bubbled to the surface in 2005 in the person of new president Ahmadinejad.
One of the most significant, probably the most significant moment was when he made his first address to the United Nations General Assembly in September of 2005, just a few months after he took office. And in this speech, he refers a few times to the promised one, a veiled reference to the 12th Imam, and then concluded the speech by praying that Allah would hasten the coming of this promised one, the 12th Imam.
The ultimate promise of all divine religions will be fulfilled with the emergence of a perfect human being.
I thought, I hope people are listening, and I hope people will take the time to try and understand what he just said.
Few listened. Even fewer understood.
You know, over the last few years, I've been invited to meet with people at the CIA, Homeland Security, Pentagon, White House, Congress. Yet, it's amazing to me that our number one national security threat as Americans is from Iran, and yet so few leaders in Washington, aside from around the world, understand the end times theology of the leaders of Iran. It's as though it's not even being investigated, it's not even being processed.
One of the biggest problems for intelligence analysis is dealing with the issue of religion. First of all, everybody tends to mirror when they look at other cultures and other civilizations. They assume that people are logical, just like they are. Or they'll say, you know what, we'll be able to deter a nuclear Iran the same way the United States deterred the Soviet Union. But the Iranian leadership, which believes in the arrival of the Mahdi, are not godless communists. They have a whole different worldview. And therefore, those who look at Iran without understanding the foundations of the Shiite faith and Iranian religion are going to make a very big mistake in dealing with this very problematic challenge for all of us.
They're telling us exactly what they want to do. They don't have a hidden agenda. They're not lying. They feel so bold as to state it to the world what they want to do. We are refusing to listen.
This end time theology is not only what he believes, but it's why he's putting his Ahmadinejad is putting his foot to the gas of accelerating Iran's nuclear weapons development program and the ballistic missile development as well. Because once Ahmadinejad is able to acquire nuclear weapons and the missiles to deliver them, Ahmadinejad could do in about 6 minutes what it took Adolf Hitler nearly 6 years to do, and that is to kill 6 million Jews.
If you really want a barometer of human decency, see how a country treats its own.
State television showed the police beating some protesters.
Because if they have contempt for their own, they certainly will do far worse with others. And I think we've seen manifestations of that over and over again.
Hitler wrote a book, Mein Kampf, saying exactly what he wanted to do. And people said, oh, he's a crazy lunatic. He doesn't really mean it.
And we would say, why do you say he doesn't mean it? He wrote it, he preached it, and later on he practiced it. Why would we in any way question the authenticity of the sentiment?
Ahmadinejad is doing the same thing.
Evil, unchecked, is a prelude for genocide. And to misunderstand the nature and threat of evil is to risk being blindsided by it.
Iran has yet to build a nuclear weapon. My administration will seek engagement with Iran based on mutual interests and mutual respect. We believe in dialogue.
Today I want to extend my very best wishes to all who are celebrating Nowruz around the world. This holiday is both an ancient ritual and a moment of renewal, and I hope that you enjoy this special time of year with friends and family. So in this season of new beginnings, I would like to speak clearly to Iran's leaders. We have serious differences that have grown over time. My administration is now committed to diplomacy that addresses the full range of issues before us and to pursuing constructive ties among the United States, Iran, and the international community. This process will not be advanced by threats. We seek instead engagement that is honest and grounded in mutual respect. Thank you, and Eid-e-Shoma Mubarak.
Publicly, the Obama administration has gone out of its way, bent over backwards to try and entice Iran to be reasonable, to sit down and, through negotiation, work out our differences.
And I think all reasonable people would like to think that reasonable people do sit down and discuss differences. But again, I stress reasonable people. But when you have someone who threatens to destroy Israel, denies the Holocaust, threatens the West, you're not talking about a reasonable person. So it's not enough to talk about it, we have to do something about it.
Behind the scenes, U.S. envoys have hurriedly hammered out deals and offered concessions to foreign governments in an attempt to create an economic noose in the form of sanctions that would force Iran to see the error of its ways. In at least one instance, the cost of cooperation was exceedingly high. President Obama agreeing to scrap plans for ballistic missile defense sites in Poland and the Czech Republic to buy Russia's cooperation. According to former United States Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton, the president's policy played right into Iran's hands.
The Obama administration's announced policy of negotiating with Iran simply gives Iran even more time to perfect their nuclear weapon and to continue work on their ballistic missile program so that ultimately they can marry the warheads with the missiles and have a worldwide delivery capability.
A missile program that, based on recently published intelligence, is much further along than originally thought. According to secret diplomatic cables recently released by WikiLeaks, North Korea has supplied Iran with missiles capable of reaching cities in Western Europe and even Moscow. Ironically, it was the specter of this very threat that led Obama's predecessor, President Bush, to push for the Eastern European missile defense sites, now bargained away.
There are those that believe that you can negotiate with a theocratic dictatorship similar to the way you would negotiate during the era of the Cold War, the political realists. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with a theocratic dictatorship, it is a different bargain, a different calculus.
Well, I think, first of all, every new president comes into office thinking he's going to do things differently from his predecessor. But the fact of the matter is engagement was tried and it failed. And therefore it shouldn't be a surprise that that's what happened in the first year and a half of President Obama's period in office.
The history of failure is clear. Iran's secret nuclear infrastructure was disclosed in 2002. A few months later, Iran sent a back-channel message to President Bush offering to negotiate next steps. The offer was declined. Instead, the Iranians found willing negotiation partners in France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. As a stipulation to the talks, Iran promised to suspend all work on its uranium enrichment program and cooperate fully with an investigation by the International Atomic Energy Agency. That promise was quickly broken.
And at the end of the day, the Iranians simply moved further down the road in nuclear enrichment and getting closer to a nuclear bomb. The Iranians brilliantly dragged the Europeans along for negotiations for 2 years, and in doing so delayed any UN Security Council action against them.
In late 2005, Hassan Rouhani, Iran's outgoing chief nuclear negotiator, made a staggering and brash disclosure.
He said, while we were negotiating with the Europeans, we proceeded with our uranium conversion project. Conversion is the second stage in uranium enrichment. And then he proudly stated that when we started the negotiations, we had no uranium conversion project in Isfahan. When we finished, it was up and running. Clearly.